was an unaccompanied minor. I'm like 9 years old, and Hurricane Alicia came through Houston, and I was delayed. And so everyone on the plane is like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, that's freaking hilarious. I assumed they would never be again, that was the end of it. But I guess they have small ones that don't make the news. So they kind of have to reuse some names.
Yeah. Because my mother's like, so how far does it go? So it goes A through Z, and then they start using like Greek letters and what have you. I said, but they'll retire the name. So Katrina's retired. I mean, that was a bitch.
I mean, yeah, because there's only one Katrina for all of us, I think, at this point.
Katrina was retired, so they'll retire the name. They don't want to go back and use that name again. Like once it's like done, it's like, okay, that one needs to. So yeah, but it's people think it's just, they're like, oh, it's just a one. Okay, so you mean to tell me that your house can withstand like 90-mile-per-hour winds? Because sometimes it can and sometimes it can't. I just want to know. Like you think that that's not a big deal? I'm sorry. That's a big deal, people. It's a huge deal. Yeah, and of course. And of course, being a hurricane also carries tornadoes.
Yeah.
So you get all the things. You got water, lightning, tornadoes, like all of it's coming. And it's just that wind will strip the stuff, strip the roofing. It's doing all the stuff. So
right. Well, and also it just depends, like if you're not used to it. Like I grew up with hurricanes. So I grew up with that being what, like I don't know if I'd say I have plans, but like I know how to prep for that.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas if you're not used to it, it can feel, I think, a little bit differently daunting. And so at any rate,
what was the prep? So the prep was to fill your tub with water, have other water containers to flush your toilet, stuff like that. Putting tape over your glass windows so that if it does shatter, it doesn't break into little pieces, or you could board the window. Like if you're on the coast, you're boarding your window.
Yeah,
we used a lot of stuff to prep, and somewhere along the line, humans just got to this place of we're invincible. Okay, keep thinking that.
No, actually, that's a big. I think about that a lot. As like modern people, we've decided that we're safe.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is we are not subject to the weather and agricultural shifts, or we haven't been for a long time, and disease at the same level that we once were. We've managed to create some conditions that are shifting that. Thank you. For our, I don't know, arrogance, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's problematic, right? Because it's like, why are we making it harder just for fun? I don't know.
Because like in the past, now there are two things at play. I will say this because I thought about it when Hurricane Harvey came through. And people are like, folks should just leave. Okay, yes, if you can get out, you can get out. But here's what, when you do evacuations, here's what you also realize is the access to evacuate. Because you have to drive someplace that's not close to the area that's going to be impacted. And it's a hurricane that becomes a storm, that becomes a depression. So it's traveling. But you got to drive someplace. That takes some money, reliable transportation. It takes the idea of when I get to this other place, where am I staying? Right?
Yeah. Like the ability not to work for that period of time.
So there's a lot of access that comes with, can we afford to evacuate? It's the same thing where people like, I can't afford to be sick. I can't afford to miss work. Because if you miss that one day, those 2 days, whatever it is, that's hitting your bottom line. Like you don't have that money. Or if you don't have a reliable vehicle. When they had Hurricane Rita, when she came through, it was right after Katrina, people like overreacted to an extent. And they all tried to evacuate. So now you're stuck in traffic for 6 hours. You're still in the Houston area. You haven't gotten out.
Right.
And the storm is coming. So my parents, with my rabbit at the time, who was hot, so he's kicking water out of his water bowl, turned around and said, we're going to have to like hunker down and ride out because we can't get out of town. Houston's huge. People think that evacuating the Houston metropolitan area, Houston by itself is huge. So now you have the whole area that you want to evacuate.
Yeah.
Like it's leaving a stadium game. It's millions of people in that place, even with the contraflow that they have that says, hey, during evacuations, the evacuation route, and they shut it all down, you still have issues because you're all trying to get out at the exact same time.
Right.
You can do it, it still has problems.
Well, and also it's like to speak to what you're saying, like, the area, like if you're going to be at risk and you don't have some place to go that is like known quantity, staying put can be safer in some ways because you have a better understanding of the resources and landscape in your community. And I admit that when Hurricane Katrina hit, I was like, why didn't they leave? And then I was reading this like report from someone who had done it, and they said, well, they had gotten something like 30 storm and hurricane warnings that summer. They were like, how do you leave 30 times in a summer?
Yeah.
Like you just can't, because and the reality is like the prediction model is still uncertain. So if you leave every time they say it's going to be bad, that's losing a month of work.
Yeah.
Assuming your work would even let you not show up.
Mm-hmm.
And then what if you have an ailing family member who's on oxygen? Moving them is not a casual thing. You have to be really sure it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And so I the ignorance that I had, I was like, oh, I see why. Because I thought one of the things that I've learned over the years is most of the time, I'm going to say always, because like, what is it? Always and never are volatile words, right? But most of the time, when you look at a situation that you've never experienced and you think people are doing something foolish, you should check it out.
Yeah.
Typically, their behavior is a direct result of circumstances that you have no understanding of. And it's that's why when I read it and I had that thought, I was like, well, there has to be a reason they didn't leave, because it's not just 3 people, right? It's like a 2/3 of the city.
Mm-hmm.
And so then like looking into it, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That it's not as straightforward as I want it to be, both because I think we like to simplify things that we're not impacted by, but also, we want to believe, to speak to your earlier point, that we are invincible, that we've solved nature. We've solved nature.
Yeah. Like if you visit people who are on the coast, they'll tell you their stories, and they have it, they can tell you like the different lines that this was hurricane so-and-so, and this was so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And you get used to, okay, like I can ride this one out because I'm not leaving, or I can't afford to leave, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is climate change is real. And so storms are getting really, really stronger than what they were 20 some years ago.
Yeah. And weather patterns are changing. It's very different. Like the prediction models are challenging because like the weather patterns are literally changing.
And the ground is sinking. So my parents in their neighborhood, it was about a few years ago, maybe 3 or so years ago now. No, almost 7, because golly, it all kind of comes together. They redid their sidewalks and they redid the driveways because it had gotten to the point where the street was here, right? Street's here. And then my parents' driveway was here. And so my dad would back out slowly to go.
Wow.
Up. And so they came in but the ground is sinking, I think, everywhere. Houston Medical Center was built on swampland.
You know what the indigenous people said, don't do that, because the swamps, even if you fill them in, they will sink, but also they provide cleanliness for the water. They provide all these other animals and biodiversity. They didn't say that because they just knew it, because they were like they call it keystone species, right? Like but it's just interesting to me, once again, the arrogance of I will say my ancestors and are like, I remember in New Orleans, the old town survived, and it was basically because Old Town was built where the original and indigenous people were like, yeah, this is the safe place. You don't build down there. That's dumb. And then we're like, yeah, we can make money. And
we can build everywhere. We're gonna build everywhere.
We'll build everywhere. We're fine.
I mean, and now
we've solved nature.
There was a sinkhole a few weeks, I think about a few weeks ago now, and I put in sinkhole and soccer fields, but I was surprised. Not only did it bring up the sinkhole in the soccer field, it brought up like 6 other sinkholes that had happened all within a 3-day radius because the ground is shifting. It's water.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, dog, like, how common is this? Because, we just go building stuff and doing stuff because we, humans, you know how they are.
I do.
And clearly I'm an alien.
I mean, you're pretty awesome. So
humans.
Humans, my people. Yeah, it's a really great book. It was started as an essay in some newspaper it's been a decade or more ago, called The World Without Us. And it freaked me out because this guy was like, he was talking about, he did a little thought exercise. He said, all right, let's say people disappeared and they didn't all die at once. So we're not dealing with rotting corpses to have plague, but we all get transported. What would happen? And all of these things that I won't put that on anyone else, that I think of as being highly permanent are not. Like New York itself, like the entire financial district would collapse within something like 3 weeks, because every day workers, many workers, go underground and pump out water that is building up under the buildings. And if they don't pump that water out, it would take something like 3 or 4 weeks for those buildings to crumble. So like there's this whole hidden infrastructure that we aren't aware of. And it's also digitally as well. I had a woman on my podcast last year, and she talked about the maintainers. She's like, it's really hard in tech and computer science to get people to do the she called quote unquote unsexy job of maintaining, but they are the ones that actually keep all of this tech that we love to use running. And as fewer and fewer people engage in maintenance and are interested in doing the maintenance work, because it's not, it's not as lucrative and it's not as exciting. Some of it's actually volunteer. Like a decent amount of the internet is run by volunteers still. It's kind of amazing.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And that's because of how it all started, right? And the idealism and the sort of I don't know, utopia is the wrong word, of the original folks who were like, we will share information and make the world better. And but like, right. But she said, like, people don't understand that so much of what we use is maintained by people, and we're having trouble attracting people to that because we don't really talk about it. We talk about the new fancy thing and the disruption of the industry. We don't talk about the cool guy who regularly does X, Y, or Z on a weekend to make sure that we all have access, right? Like, it's so interesting to me. It's also, by the way, like part of why I'm pretty sure the whole idea that like greed and people won't work if they're not paid, all of those narratives are put on us, because so much of what we have in life that we love is the result of people's passions. Like so many inventions that we have are because people spent weekends, trying to figure it out. Like what's the guy that invented the light bulb? Like that wasn't his thing. I feel ridiculous that I don't remember his name right now. So go ahead and mock me. But like, and then you think about like musicians, right? Like they're always out there practicing. They start out, they spend often years creating before they get paid for it. Like parents, they are constantly giving to the community and their family. Like there's so much of the world is run on goodwill and kindness and service to others, right? So much of it. When you think about it, and I know, like, I talk about having trust issues, right? But the reality is that to a certain extent, I don't, because I eat food in public and I travel on planes. Like I'm trusting other people to manage my personal possessions. I'm trusting them to manage my food and to actually handle it healthily. The majority of times I don't worry about that, or a lot. And I think it's because for the most part, even if I don't think people are particularly, motivated by good, although I a little bit do, I think most of us recognize we're in this together. Like I might as well show up and be fair and thoughtful, because that's the only way this works. It doesn't work any other way. We don't get anything we want without that.
If I must say so, as always, you have a beautiful way of giving us a segue into today's topic.
Ooh, autonomy.
Always, because is the idea that we're all working for the good. Somebody out there is fighting for you, maintaining this for you. Somebody's doing it. Santa's elves, I don't know, the little pigs
Right?
that fly. Somebody out there is doing the work. So today's topic is about women's rights and bodily autonomy.
Mhm.
That's our topic for today. Yes?
Yep. That's our topic for today. For today.
Oh, Lord have mercy, Aicila, I swear.
I mean, these are not for dinner conversations because so there's very light topics.
like, I had a thought. I had a thought. And it goes back to something that you and I discussed sometime before, which is, how a message, depending on where you are in life, how it hits differently and how you can unlearn a message if you so choose to. So I'm thinking I'll just start with the average everyday the average monthly event of having a menstrual cycle. And I remember as a kid, the way that it was phrased and the way that you shared with others was so and so is sick.
Yes.
And so you go through junior high, you go through high school, you're like, oh, well, I'm sick. Really? What are you sick from? I'm just not feeling well. The idea of taking a very average, normal body process and making it into an illness, a sickness, versus what it is. This is normal. This just says, hey, I'm not pregnant. Woohoo! Or maybe, we've seen stranger things, but again, on average.
On average.
It says I'm not pregnant. Perfect.
Yep.
I don't have to worry about XYZ. That's all it is, but it's a bodily thing. It just sheds out. It's like, she don't have any kids. I'm gonna let this go. Then we gonna go on about our business and right. So we have taken a lot of things that impact women specifically and made them into illnesses, topics of shame, something that needs to be controlled, financially, what's the word? Stressing, because there is the pink tax.
There's the pink tax.
I'm trying to think. Are there anything else? Like, have I gotten it all? Did I miss it?
I think that's a pretty
It's
good
a
list.
good start, right? It's a good start.
Yeah. It's a great
It's a good
start. Well,
But
and a
go
friend
ahead.
of mine once commented on this, and I thought it was so interesting. She said, like, there's violence everywhere. We talk about all kinds of ways that we hurt people and blood happens. But the one that we are quote unquote grossed out by is the only one that is a natural part of the process of life. And I was like, ooh.
That's a great point. That's a great point. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point there. So where do we begin with this? So, because it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. And I know let me start with this. What am I focused on as an individual is women's reproductive healthcare rights.
Right.
Healthcare rights. It's just good old fashioned healthcare. I'm focused on that. And I do look at still how women's rights in, let's say, the workplace is impacted. I don't want to go into like the idea of being paid fairly, because there are still some women who don't believe that we deserve equal pay and things like that. So I don't want to go into that. And I'm not going to dip into the toe of who should run the household, because I don't want to get into that either. So I know we're trying
just me. I should run it. All of them. Right? Just I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. Just like, I got you.
But I will start with this. I was talking with a dear friend, and he was mentioning, like, we were talking about people have a hard time being alone. And you will see people go from relationship to relationship to relationship. They don't know how to be alone. And I thought, but it depends on the generation, because there were women There were women at a certain point that couldn't have their own banking account, checking account, their own selves without a spouse or a partner or a father to say, yes, she can get XYZ dollars, right? So there is a slew of women who have been part of a relationship, marriage, whatever, partnership that didn't serve them beyond, I got to figure out how to get access to money and what have you. So I'm in this relationship, could have been abusive, verbally, physically, what have you, but I'm here. And because this is all I know, when it ends, I just have to find another partner because that's all I know.
Yeah.
Whereas I grew up with, you can be your own person and you don't have to have a partner. You don't have to have, and that's 50-50. Because at one point it was, you could, but I mean, I'm thinking Murphy Brown, right? Murphy Brown's like, look, I don't need a goddamn man. I'm gonna go have a baby. I'm gonna have this career. so I got a split message of traditional and this awful thing over here that Murphy Brown was promoting.
Yeah, me too. I think that some of that's our generation. One of my theories is that the women who raised us were really taught to believe, like you were saying, they didn't have a lot of options. They were taught to believe that their success was the ability to attract the right man. And that was actually legitimately true, right? And then the world shifted and the things that they had been taught still felt real to them. And so we were raised with that conditioning, or maybe we weren't. Maybe my mom was definitely very much about that. She felt like real success was having a man. And then the world that I lived in kept saying, oh, there's these other things. And so I definitely got very confused by that. It sounds like it was a little bit different for you, that you had a family that was supportive maybe. And then, the mix, but then also, yes, the cultural message were really mixed. And you and I have talked about this before, in that, like, to go back to that idea of autonomy and to really dig into, for me anyway, why are people so afraid of women having self-determination? Not just men, women, and culturally, there's this like react, and I have it too sometimes. Like, I've worked really hard over the years to be less willing to listen to my preconditioning, right? And yet there are times when I'm like, my son says this a lot. He's like, your first reaction is like your conditioning, and your second reaction is who you are. And I really like that, because I'm just like, there's a lot of times when I'll like have a moment, I'll be like, what am I? That's not me. But it's just, we were raised in a certain way, like you said, and then we get confronted by it and we're like, wait a minute, I don't think that. So I do have some grace for the fact that there are a lot of folks that are kind of stuck in the past, because I know that it takes a lot of effort to get out of that. But that's a real question I have, is why does female self-determination have such a bad rap in our society? Like, what is happening there?
I like that question. We may have to come back and revisit that one on a separate thing, honestly. Kind of like a nightcap.
A nightcap, yeah.
After dinner.
And
After dinner.
And the bodily autonomy thing for me is, in a lot of ways, many of the restrictions that we're dealing with around equal rights are because people who are not male-bodied, white, somewhat wealthy humans in our country are asking to have equal bodily autonomy. And we've named it different things. We've named it women's rights and racial equity and trans rights. And the reality is all of those are actually healthcare access. They are all actually the same thing, which is that we want to have equal access to bodily autonomy and to making the decisions that we feel are best for us with regards to our health and our relationship. And the truth is, nobody knows what's happening, right? Like, I might make a decision and then realize like the medicine wasn't there or whatever. But at least I get to know that I was given information and then had access to that decision. Without healthcare access, I can know the right thing, but I can't pay for it. So, and then people are like, why do you take, X, Y, and Z thing that's clearly been proven wrong? I'm like, because I want some hope and I can't afford the thing I know will work. Like, that's all. Like,
That's all I'm asking for.
I'm just like, since I can't afford the thing that we're sure will work, I'm gonna take the thing that has a 1 in 8,000 chance maybe of working because I want some hope. I want to feel like I'm taking some kind of action in my life.
Yes. Let me do that. Before we go too far,
yeah.
I do want us to define bodily autonomy for the viewers. So I've pulled up a little something out here.
I love it.
And it says bodily autonomy is the fundamental right of individuals to make decisions about their own bodies without outside influence or coercion. It's about power, agency, choice, and dignity, and is considered central to other human rights principles like gender equality and human dignity. Now, of course, people can read a longer paragraph or what have you, definition about it. If we want to short up into layman terms, how would you say it? I would just say as you mentioned, the right to choose for your own body.
Yeah.
I think it's as simple as that. But we are still live in a world, a society, let's say society, where women are seen as property. Am I too far gone? Am I too far gone? Sometimes I say some stuff. I'm gonna say some stuff. That's why it's not for dinner. Because I want you guys to enjoy your meal. Because I'm gonna say some stuff. But no, I do believe that there is still a level of property. There's still it's a light mental thought that there is property attached to women. Well, still. And because of that, they should be treated like property, and they are not equipped to make decisions about their body, their health, when they want to have kids, if they want to work outside the home or inside the home. Like, those messages are still here because we're just seen as property. We're second-class citizens. We may be fancy second-class citizens, but we are still very much second-class. At least that's how I see it.
Well, and to further your point, honestly, because I think that's correct, to give an example that might, for people who are like, nah, we're past that. If you think about, so let's think about a very like low stakes thing that people get upset about, right? So folks get really upset that I might say, don't call me honey. I don't want to be called honey by a random stranger, right? Now, that's not a big deal, right? Like, I'm not affecting anyone's life. And really, I'm, whoever I'm interacting with, no big deal. But some people would get a little bit out of shape if I was like, hey, please don't call me honey. I don't even have to say please, but I probably would, right? And I think if you really investigate that, what comes up is they feel like they have the right to call you whatever they want. And why would they have that right? Because they're entitled. They feel entitled to like using something to call you that is their choice. So that where you're talking about the property piece, like, does somebody, own me the way that a woman was owned 100 years ago? No. And I feel like the offense that people take when they are asked to behave with some self-restraint is the result of a feeling of entitlement over a certain type of person. And there's obviously many identities. We're just talking about women today, but there's this feeling of entitlement over a certain type of person that for them means that if they behave with self-restraint, they're losing something. They feel like they lose something. And therefore, if they feel like they lose something, it means they had something, which means they feel a sense of ownership over that person's name, identity, right to move, right to exist, how to present. Right. So it's like, I totally agree with you. I think it's just more subtle now.
It is. It's okay. So let's take it. Let's take that a little bit further, or Betty, give people an example, because I like the nickname part of it. But let's just take someone's name, which I have always said, when you choose to not use someone's name, you are purposely being disrespectful because it's the name. And I, as the person, get to tell you how you should see me. So when I meet people, it is Gwendolyn G. R. Houston Jack. It is Gwendolyn. It's Gwendolyn.
Right.
It's never Gwen. It's not Gwenny. It's not some of these other whatever. It is Gwendolyn. And yet and still, when someone says, hey, Gwen, I'm like, nope, my name is Gwendolyn, but how can I help you? And they're like, I mean, why would you be offended? This is my fucking name.
Like, why wouldn't you just be grateful? Like, thank you for letting me know. I am so sorry I keep messing that up. Right. Let me practice. Like, it seems like you said, like it shouldn't be. And yet,
yeah. People get like, well, I was just, but you didn't get my name right. And let's just say that you've told this person, and yet they continue to do it. So now you don't even care. So now I know this is just, because we've seen people who aren't, my name is William. So Bill, it's like, my name's not Bill.
Mm-hmm.
My name is William. And if you think about respect, it starts with a person's name. But you are correct in that people do feel this sense of, how dare you correct me? It's like, but you don't get to call me whatever you want to call me. But if you're going to call me something else, I'm going to call you Sally, and I'm going to call you Roberta, and then we'll see how it feels, right? Because, and I admit, sometimes I've been that petty. I'm not gonna lie to you. if you're gonna make a point to not get my name right, I'm gonna make the point just as well. You know, and I mean, I won't do a hey you, because that's kind of obvious, unless I get really petty. But people do seem to have this idea they have a sense of power and that they've lost something, which is so bizarre. So let's talk about overall then. We got this individual. So now we're saying that there are people in this world who feel like women can't make these decisions. So as a guy, all right, some old white man, I'm going to tell you when you can and can't have kids. And I'm going to force this upon you because what exactly? Oh, it's the sanctity of life. That's the story that we're pushing with. That's the story. Completely forgetting that women's healthcare has so many random things. So I was talking with some people today about male OBs or gynecologists, right? Because in the past it was mostly men. So you got who you got. And I said before, I picked my first one because I thought, since his name was Dixie, he was like Dixie Cooney off of All My Children, and it was not a woman. It was very much a guy. I was like, damn, his name is Dixie. Okay, but whatever. He was the best doctor ever, but I really want a woman, right? So I'm looking at this and thinking, you've had men who have always told women XYZ about their body. And when people talk about reproductive healthcare or healthcare rights, they leave out all the things that women deal with. Now, I will tell you, I was put on birth control, that's like what, 22, 21? I have to do the math. Not because I was promiscuous. Remember, I believe in chastity. I believe in abstinence to this day. I believe, lock it up, sisters, lock it up. But that's my own personal feeling. But I had gotten to a place where there was a cyst that you could literally see, Aicila. I could touch it.
Wow. I bet that was painful. Was that painful?
Actually, it wasn't. Let me tell you how stupid it is. So I got caught up early on. When I was younger, I was caught up in the hustle grind mentality that I couldn't take off from work because there's a major sale, a major event happening. And so I'll take off from work afterwards. I was working with this thing. It wasn't painful, but I could see it. I could literally look down and be like, twink. So when I went to the doctor, and he was like, oh my God, we got to get into surgery today. And I was like, oh, this is serious? My bad. Clearly lied about how long it was there because I was so embarrassed. And I said, well, doc, I just can't take time off. Like, I got to plan for things. He said, oh, well, what's one more week? You've already waited 6 months. I was like, did he just come for me? Like, okay, my bad. So after that, to keep it away, to keep this cyst away, I got put on birth control. If you look at the stories that they're telling right now, this whole deal of birth control is the devil and contraception is the devil and women only go here to kill the baby, you completely leave out that women like me, and oh my God, am I going to say it right? Endometriosis?
Endometriosis.
Yeah. Women like me who have that problem. Now, because of the birth control, I didn't have a cyst. Not until I had to get off of it because you can only be there for so long, right? Truly enough, a year afterwards, boing, it pops up. Now this one I can't see. Like so far as we're watching it, but it's the whole idea of when people talk about healthcare, they leave out all of the wonky things that go on inside our bodies. It's not just about having babies. It's not just that. We use birth control and other medications to keep away problems that would perhaps impact us having babies if we chose to do so.
Well, and that's part of my thing is I feel like a medical decision should be between the person affected, their guardian if they have one, and a medical provider. And that's the medical decision that we need to make. It's funny to me that the conservative identifying people are voting for, essentially more regulation. And it's like, it's weird because I feel like, I believe, in my opinion, in like sort of common sense regulation around the thing, like, we need clean water, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think people should be making decisions for themselves like that. But it's just, I don't know that. And I also feel like it's interesting because I think that's important. And I think I've shared, I used to work in the LGBTQ community around social justice and people early on, and it may still be an argument, people would say, oh, it's not a choice. And I felt like that was a bad way to go because I'm like, whether it's a choice or not, we are a community that believes that we should protect people's rights. We protect a choice in our Constitution, which is religious choice. And so we've already decided that there are some choices that we think are important to protect. And the pursuit of happiness often means a life companion or a family. So it seems to me like protecting that as a choice is reasonable in terms of both, whether or not we have birth control available, whether or not someone marries someone of whatever gender they feel, whether they're attracted to. And so it's both, it's heartless that they are so intent on controlling women that they are okay with people being harmed. That doesn't feel particularly pro-life to me. And I also really hesitate because I'm like, no, it doesn't matter why you're taking birth control. One, that's nobody's business. And two, that's a reasonable choice for you to be able to access. We are not as limited as we once were in terms of how we access these types of medications. This is information and resources that are readily available. Why hoard them? Who wins from that? I don't think anybody does. And I think that's the real issue is that people that are mostly pushing this agenda, I don't think they care about any of us personally, but a lot of the folks that support the agenda, I don't know that they've really thought it through.
They remove themselves from the equation. So a dear friend, Chris Edwards, I will give him credit for this thought because we were talking like I came at that last bill, the last vote where they were voting against contraception, what have you. I came from that thinking about what would my health be like today had I not had the birth control to keep it at bay. I have friends who have suffered greatly from fibroids and endometriosis, right? I mean, multiple surgeries, time and time and time again, having issues, getting pregnant, keeping the pregnancy, time and time again. So I felt pretty good that I was able to get this. Now, granted, we know now that Gwendolyn was not responsible enough to have kids. Thank you, Jesus. And I will say this, I'm sorry. Best skin ever. I had the best skin ever. Like not a pimple. I can go ahead and tell you, and I will say this too. Another side effect was it makes your boobs a little bigger. So there are some positives to all this other bullshit. Okay, I'm just gonna put it out there for you. But
love it.
I think about like where would I be had I not had that? But when we talk about contraception, they always go to birth control. Do know condoms are in that bitch?
Right?
Condoms are a contraception. And Chris pointed out that people forget that you not only want to think about not the whole lack of pregnancy, but it's the idea of being, well, not the idea, it is being safe. Think about your STDs.
Yeah.
And all the other things that you get when you are not safe. It's not just pregnancy. There's this whole other category that goes on. But when people talk about it, they remove themselves as if they have nothing to do with it and it would never impact them. That's just not true.
Yeah.
He's like, think about the people, think about the guys who go out and get their condoms, and women get condoms too. But think about the STIs and STDs and all the other sexually transmitted diseases that would run amok if we did not have contraception. And I thought, Chris, how did I completely missed that point? And I thought, that's a great point. Because folks don't put that in the conversation. It is always on this opposite side of whatever impacts the woman, not what impacts all of us.
Right.
Because it's my job to not get pregnant, but let me not start do it.
Well, and I want to say in the 70s, when there was a huge teen birth rate and STI sort of like explosion, our country decided to take a moral stance, and a lot of the European countries took a health stance. And they've been, what's interesting to me, far more successful at reducing the rate of teen pregnancy, the rate of STIs, and increasing the age of first sexual behavior, first sexual intercourse, by approaching it from a health perspective. And I think some of that's because it's easier to have that conversation. But I also think some of it's because that's more reasonable. Kids they sniff out BS real fast, and they learn fast what they're supposed to say and what they can get away with doing. And there's a lot of winking and nodding around this kind of stuff. So I don't know.
Let's go there. Can we go there really quick?
Absolutely.
And we're going to talk about the kids. So, as a side note from all of these rights, but it's a very good point, because I believe in our society, we do a lot of fear mongering.
Yeah.
It's never from a place of what's best for you, what would help you, what would do XYZ. It's always the fear of. It's the, if you have sex and you're going to get pregnant and you'll get this and you'll get that. If you drink alcohol, what's going to happen if you do drugs? What was that one? Here's your brain.
Yeah, this is your brain on drugs. And it's a fried egg.
Yeah. Any questions? You're like, well, I don't want to be a fried egg. No, I'm good. I mean, not that it works for me. I just had a different mindset. Like, I didn't have my first sip of alcohol until I was 24. So I don't, never did all that other, like, it was never, it just never talked to me. It never talked to my spirit. So I was like, I don't care. And I was not one for trends and following the crowd, but side note. So because, as you mentioned, other societies, other communities go right at it and just have a conversation and talk about it, not with a sense of fear, but let's talk about the pluses, let's talk about the minuses, and then you can figure out which way to go. You can have kids who have had a glass of wine and they're not like, oh my God, let me go figure it out. And you know what I mean? And you can have kids who realize, I'm not emotionally ready to jump into a sexual relationship because I don't have I don't have that thought process, right? Like, I don't have all that is necessary. And or they could be like me. I want to live this amazing life, nothing against kids, but I don't want to put that at risk. Now, that was my mindset. My mind. But again, I was scared straight because my sister, after she was out of high school, had my nephew, but I was still in high school. And I was like, this is that bullshit. I'm not doing it ever. Right. So everybody has something that changes how they see it. But we still have this whole idea of, let's not talk to the kids about sex, about gender identity, because they're kids. Now, they want to talk about the Bible. Now, I don't know if they read the Bible, but there's a lot of hoeing going on. There's a lot of something going on in there, right?
Yeah.
That aside, how does your child know what is appropriate for them and what is not if you never talk about it?
Right. Well, and I do think that there are. So I wanted kids, I raised kids, and what I saw, and this is super simplified, but there's my observation is that there seems to be a tendency towards either sort of this authoritarian, like, I know best, I'm going to tell you how things work, and this more like guidance. Like, I'm going to teach you how to trust yourself. I'm going to give you the space to make age appropriate risks. I'm going to assess. It's a lot. I will say it's a lot more work in the moment. I tended more towards that, of saying I'm going to assess, like, is this something you can live through? and the other question is, do I want to deal with the consequences of you not getting this? Because like there's sometimes when I'm like, no, I can't handle that today. And that's, I think, equally valid. And versus, but for me, it was kind of the thing of like, if I teach them to listen to me, to trust my judgment as the final authority, then when they get to a point where they choose a different authority, they're just going to listen to that. Whereas if I support them in learning how to trust themselves and make assessments and listen to their own authority, then they'll filter any other authority, including me, which I admit wasn't always convenient, but I respect them for that, is through that lens of their own values and their own determination in life and their own goals and hopes. And some of the values that I wanted for them, they do have, like, and I feel like that, I feel super like I won in terms of that whole experience. But I think some people are afraid of that because it's what we talked about before. There's not as much control. Like, you have to genuinely be willing to say, I'm going to let them make this decision, even though, and I think school system is a great example. Like when my kids were in like junior and senior classes, it was one of those times where I really like had to work with my insecurity around it because there's all this pressure. What college are they going to go to? I never really cared about that. I wanted them to find their own way. But you get so much messaging on that. I started to be like, did I do something wrong? Did I fail them? Are their lives ruined at 17 because I didn't push them? And I had to really face that and be like, yeah, no, actually, that's not real. But it can feel real in the moment. And that's I think it's a manipulation also of the deep love and care we have for younger people and the younger people in our lives and our children. Like, we want to help them, but the whole let's pearl clutching, let's do it for the kids has been used, in my opinion, to do things that are, I think actually very harmful for children in our society, with this justification that we're trying to protect them. And I'm just like, we don't want a bunch of people that have been protected from life. We want a bunch of people that have learned how to assess risk, how to live according to their values, how to identify their goals and work towards them, how to participate in their community, how to know what they need in order to be able to show up authentically. Like, that's what I want. It sounds to me, when you take some of the like my jargon out of it, very much like a conservative value system, which is like, we want people who have responsibility and accountability. And so like, it's not any different. This authoritarian piece is problematic.
It's extremely problematic. Although this is not the topic that we're talking on today, but explains why we have a good chunk of the issues that we have with certain persons of authority, where a child has said, oh, well, this was my coach, this was the so-and-so, so I trusted them,
right?
And I thought, but if we start at a young age discussing these things, I mean, you hit a trigger phrase for me, the whole deal, like, I want to protect you. I hate that phrase. You have no idea. When it comes up in movies and TV shows, I'm this close to throwing something at the screen. Like, this is just cut it out. I protect you. I just wanted to. It's like they're called lies to a certain degree, or omission of. But stop, because it tends to cause more problems than anything. But that's a whole nother. Let me stay on task. Stay on task here. We have this issue believing that we are, as you say, protecting our kids from things, probably because we ourselves have not wrapped our arms around it. Like having this conversation, like we know it as a society, and I use the word we know strongly, that we have made a decision that we're not going to talk about politics, religion, sex, what else? Well, what else? Money.
Oh yeah, I was talking about money
in public. Like we don't talk about those things. But why? Why don't you? Why can't we talk about religion? Why can't we talk about politics? Why can't we talk about money? Why can't we talk about sex? Why can't we talk about it? Like, you tell me. All I know is at a young age, I heard that message. And so I followed it. And I thought, well, I don't understand why we're not talking about some of this. Like, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand. Because if you don't talk about it in public, when do you talk about it? Because you don't talk about it at home either.
Yeah, I'm like,
And when I was in
where?
school, they were like, I don't want her to take that class. It's like, so when do you actually get to start talking about it? But then you wonder why people can't negotiate for a better rate for their work. You wonder why people feel the way they feel. Or no, let me go back. You understand why people don't know how the government actually works. Those three branches, yeah.
Yeah.
You see that there is these issues when it comes to sexual relationships and things of that nature. I mean, like all this stuff stems from us not talking about stuff
Yeah.
ever.
No, I
We don't talk
agree.
about it. So then
Well,
you look at your adults and you say, okay, well, what did they have now? I'm not faulting my parents at all. I
no.
had a mother who was a minister who had her way of discussing it, and then I had pops who had his way. I got the best of both worlds. You
Yeah.
know, I knew when somebody was spitting game, and I was like, he about that BS, because my pops told me about things like that. You know, so I had the best of both worlds, and then I thought for my niece and nephews, I don't want that kind of, I'm gonna hide something from you. They didn't hide it from us, but it wasn't like, you know,
Yeah.
it wasn't out. I mean, wasn't out there like that. But I would want my nieces and nephews to have an understanding of here's what goes down when, and here's when things are going down and it's not a good going down, right? And
Yeah.
then having that discussion versus sweep it under the rug and eventually somebody will have the conversation and assuming, you know, we see these commercials about young people being coerced to do things that they don't want to do, both male and female.
Mm-hmm.
That, well, if you loved me, you do this. And if you've loved, like, if you don't
Mm-hmm.
start having that conversation at a young age, you get into that spot.
Yeah.
So at some point, we have to talk about it. I don't know, 5, 6 years old. Like, when you, I don't, what, 4?
Uh,
And you tailor the message to the audience, obviously.
I mean, honestly, I started when they were born. When I was changing my kids' diapers, I was like, I do this because you can't. No one's allowed to touch you. I don't know if they understood my words, but I was like, no one touches you without your permission as soon as that's available. And like when they got to a certain age, you know, and they were moving, you know, if anyone wanted a hug, they didn't want to give it, I'd be like, you don't have to. And if someone tried to give them pressure, I'd say that's not allowed in our house. I constantly reinforce the concept of bodily autonomy. I didn't have the word at the
Yeah.
time. But it was so important to me that they be very clear that that was theirs and that anyone who had access to anything about who they were and their body was completely up to them. And, you know, obviously there were some things like, you know, you have to go to school. That's how we do in our country. So there's a little bit, but even that we had some negotiation around in terms of, you know, we talked about homeschool, and my cat's going to come say hi. Hi, everybody. He's recently decided this is his new favorite place.
Oh my God.
And apparently he can jump up. So, and welcome to the podcast, cat. And but it was so I mean, I like you said, age appropriate, but I think it's one of those things that you also have to model it. And I feel like that's where the ownership thing can come in first. Like a lot of us, we do have this idea that because they're little and we can move them, that we have the right to. And the reality is that we don't. Like there's when they're in danger, there's absolutely times when I did assert an authority because I was like, oh, you can't go in the street. I'm picking you up. I don't care if you don't like it, because the harm that would come to you from running into the street when you don't understand how cars work is much higher. Now, I tried to just keep them away from that, but like there are times, and you know, and so, but I was very clear, this is an exception. And this is, you know, and I built a lot of trust with them through that process. Like when we went to the doctor and they had to get a shot, I was like, we're going to the doctor, you're going to get a shot. It's going to hurt a lot and it's going to suck, and then it won't hurt as much. And then we're going to go home and I'm going to hold you. Like that's the plan. So they understood, and they had at least the control of knowing what was happening, even if they couldn't control whether or not I was going to give them the vaccine, because that was the thing that I thought was important. And I feel like, because what you're talking about, a lot of times I think also folks consider, you know, quote unquote, talking to kids about bodily autonomy, or anybody, as having to have this conversation. And I'm like, just model it, just be that, right? And I'll one of the things to segue to is that, you know, we talked before about, you know, we see a lot of these legislation things coming through, Supreme Court decisions. There's an actual plan to continue down this path. Should the conservative community win this election? If they don't win this election, they're going to keep trying for the next one.
Oh, yeah.
So this is not a short-term thing, right? Mm-mm. And I don't know if you know, but the Equal Rights Amendment is very close to passable. About 6 years ago, maybe 8, Congress voted to extend a tax that had been like 130 years old, that had been a tax amendment, and to extend the right to vote on it. So if Congress were to extend the right to vote on the ERA, and I think at this point, if we got 2 or maybe 3 more states to ratify it, we could have an ERA. And that would enshrine a large number of equal access rights for all people into our Constitution. And so that's what I was saying in our last episode about, like, we've got distracted by the president being important. And really what we need to do is be putting our effort, and I'm not, I shouldn't say really what we need to be doing, but in addition to whatever that is, thank you for the help, my cat. Let's see what we can do here. Hi, everybody. In addition to the presidential efforts that we need to do, we also really need to be looking at the things that have that long-term impact. Like I think we got, like you said before, we got a little bit, I'll say, complacent, and like executive orders are actually problematic. They should be used sparingly, because the president is not a king. And I'll own that there were times when I was like, yeah, go for it, I'm tired of the blah. But really, actually, we all need to be a little bit more involved in our local and state politics. We need to be more involved with our congressional representatives and our senators, such that things like the ERA are getting passed. Things like, the Missing, Murdered, and Indigenous Women Act. Like, I'm so grateful, honestly, that Trump passed that. And we really should have had something going on around that. I personally think we need to have a woman I was associated with she has what she calls a Truth and Conciliation project for Indigenous and Black people. We need to have something like that really acknowledges the impact and corrects it, instead of relying on this whole, king-like president thing that we're moving towards, because it's never going to be in our best interest ever. No. We're never, ever, ever going to be like, gosh, it's so great that we have an all-powerful, whatever. I don't know. It didn't go there. So that's a little bit sort of when we talk about this and the autonomy piece. For me, it's really like practically there's a whole voting process, but also I want to see ways that we can really work to enshrine actual progressive values into our legal documents and live in a rule of law, which means we're all going to be slightly irritated by something. We're all going to be like, that feels like a, irritating waste of time, or that feels unfair, or whatever. Good. If you feel a little bit like things aren't your way, then probably things are more fair. If you're walking around going,
likely, yeah,
we might have some problems. You might need to look at your privilege, right? Like, and you're like, it's all fine. What you worried about? That might be the problem, my friend. So
that might be the problem. I agree with that. I agree. Yes. Distractions. Yeah. When you said modeling, I think immediately of my parents who modeled how they were active civically in their community.
Yeah.
You do what you see.
Right?
See. I mean, even when you can try to go against it, but you're going to start off with, well, they were doing it that way, so I'm going to do it that way too.
Right? No, that's how we learn.
Line up at a wall. People would line up right behind them, and I'm thinking, do you even know why you're behind that person? Oh, because everybody is standing here. It's like, but that's a wall, though.
No, they've done social experiments on that, and one of them was really interesting. Was I feel like they had like a bunch of people in a waiting room, and they came out and they told them all to stand up every 5 minutes. It was like clicker training when they clicked something, and then after a little while, they stopped telling people that, and then they cycled people in and out. But they would come out and do the clicker, right? And the people would still stand up. And so the new people never heard anything, but they just started standing up with everyone because that's what you're doing. That's how we learn. We're social creatures, and we learn by
Yeah.
watching. The whole mirror neurons thing has a purpose other than like stories, which is also pretty cool. One thing we talked about that I want to touch on, I've done my reconnaissance again in terms of looking into some of the conservative narrative, because I am more left leaning. So I'm really trying to like learn more about some of those other narratives, specifically around the narrative of the Supreme Court decision around Roe v. Wade, which is that the conservative pundits are saying that we're overreacting because we're saying that abortion was taken away, when really it was just given to the states. And, you know, it's still accessible as long as your neighbors are okay with it, right? Like, you got that face. And I was like, okay, you know, if I'm trying to put myself in that position, I can see how that would land for someone, and thinking that, oh, you're overreacting. It's like, however, if, say, the Second Amendment were repealed and we just gave it back to the states, I don't think that would be the same feeling. They would feel like something was taken away. And it goes back to your point earlier of people don't apply it to themselves.
Yeah.
And I used to do inclusion trainings, diversity and equity. And one of the first things I have always worked on with people is teaching them how to listen.
It's the hardest thing.
It's the hardest part. And I feel like if you can figure out how to listen, a lot of the things that you're dealing with are a lot of the confusion that we're dealing with, and the manipulation is a little bit harder to get through. And additionally, like with this whole, like you and I have talked about a number of things, but I would say for the people that don't agree, the people that are like, yeah, no, it's been given to the states, or you're just wrong, or you're killing babies, whatever it is, whatever you're feeling, if you're all listening and made it through our whole show, which, you know, I won't expect that, but I'm hopeful. Then how to put yourself in that position. Think of something. If it's not the Second Amendment, think of something that you like that is considered controversial by people you don't agree with, being put into the same process. And think about if that would really land for you. Would you really feel like that was okay? Would you really feel like you live in the land of the free if you had to like secretly do medical decisions? Like if you would be prosecuted for having a miscarriage, or be prosecuted for something like that's really try. And for the three of you that maybe did that, thank you. Thank you. Because we have to find a way to work together. We are actually all here. We are all here.
We most certainly do. As we bring this dinner bell to our table, yeah, I know when I am listening to other people's arguments about women's healthcare, and I'm going to stay there. Healthcare for women. Our bodies are all kinds of lined up differently than what this guy is dealing with. Like, we have all of these medicines and commercials for what men deal with. You got a bump on your erection, you just can't even get it up. We got a solution for you. But when it comes to women, there is this laser-like focus on, we can't have that.
Yeah.
We could never have that. We could never have. It goes in my head. I keep hearing this idea of control, and people can talk about the sanctity of life and all this other stuff. I would love to believe that if the world we live in displayed it, but we can't even get a living wage. So help me figure that out. Just not on this show. Not on this episode of the show. Not on this episode. But I will say, I agree with you that people should look at what others believe and hear and just listen to it. Like, you don't have to agree. You don't ever have to agree. We're not here to make you agree. The idea is to explore it, see what's going on, and perhaps hear someone else's story and perspective, and then go that way. People talk about, well, put yourself in so-and-so's shoes. I can't wear them shoes. It's never going to happen.
Right.
So I don't go there, but I do go with, look at a different perspective. And I would, and when I, but my debating brain, when people say, oh, it's the sanctity of life and God wanted you to, it's like, okay, I hear you clearly, but without the mother, there's no baby. So if the mother dies, now the kid's got like a 50-50 chance again. Now I'm just,
well,
you
and
know,
it's
like
the
you need,
hypocrisy of it is
yeah.
also I recognize that, you know, we all have some, it's much easier to notice other people's hypocrisy. So with that caveat of recognizing, you know, we've all got our stuff, it's that part is really hard for me, because if we legitimately cared about life and children, we would have universal health care. We would have maternal and paternal leave. We would have enrichment courses free and available for young people to really advance. Honestly, if we cared about the advancement and success of our culture and improvement of our GDP, we would do all of that. If more of our population was invested in such a way, what could we achieve? Like, what would happen if people didn't have to spend 100 hours a week and 5 jobs working to pay the rent? Yes. What could they invent? What could they create? What could they solve? I don't know, because we're not doing it.
Something for us to ponder on.
Right?
Definitely something for us to ponder on. But consider it. I'm gonna leave it there. The right to choose for yourself is all we're asking for. That is it. It's a very simple choice.
I remember my uncle, his thing, this is a very traditional anti-women's rights narrative when I was in high school, which is, it's not the right to choose, because you already had the choice. You had sex. That was your choice. And so their whole thing, and I feel like that's still underground in this. And it goes back to what you were talking about. And that's why I talk about bodily autonomy, because it's really about who gets to control your body. And if you get to control your body, then that means you have to have the right to choose whether or not you're going to engage in sexual behavior and whether or not that's going to lead to a child. But the idea that, you know, because the other thing is this, it was such a hypocritical narrative. Like, the men were supposed to sow their wild oats with women who were supposed to say no. And then we wonder where rape culture comes from. I mean,
I was going there. I was like, okay, so that choice, the choice to, you know, incest and rape, though, even those are no exceptions to birthing the baby. It's like, okay. So here's what I'm thinking, Aicila, because real talk, we just opened another can of worms for our dinner table, because when we talk about women's rights, and there is this very clear message of men having this double standard, because it has always been, in my opinion, and I talk about it, when it comes to women, your focus is just to not get pregnant. That's your focus. That's the message. We're not talking about pleasure. We're not talking about your needs, your wants, because we are getting our property to serve XYZ.
Yep.
And so when they come into this conversation, and it does, like you mentioned, it's the sowing of wild oats and raping whoever you feel, because I just felt like I needed it. I mean, like, hey, it's not my fault that I can't control my urges. And I'm gonna leave it. Okay, I'm gonna leave it with this. And I do want to get, because we have to talk about like the rape and incest and things. We have to go there. I remember listening to one of God damn it, a pastor who said that the young man, I think it was like maybe 8 or 9, this 8 or 9-year-old boy enticed him, which is why what happened happens. We hate to leave you guys with like a cliffhanger, but we have to make a part 2, clearly.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
It's part of this conversation.
It is. It's because who has the right to say yes and no? Do children? Do women?
Yeah. Okay. That's what. So we know that we're going to come back for a second serving.
Yep.
And we're going to dip into this conversation of, it is women's rights, but more importantly, bodily autonomy. And we're going to do a couple of servings of discussing, as you mentioned, who has the right to say yes or no. I may have to bring me some moonshine for that one.
This is the aperitif, the cocktail hour. They're not for dinner conversations. Cocktail hour.
Yes, it'll be our cocktail hour. Oh goodness! So we'll just say tune in for our next conversation.
Yes, please do, and also let us know what you think, because we're interested in actually having this conversation in a wider way.
Yes, most definitely.